And welcome back to the best 10 minutes of your day. And that is, of course, by watching the Hockey Show. Now today, well, I should say this evening, this afternoon, I am talking about the NHL's recent list that they just brought out on NHL Everywhere. Is they listed their top 10 goaltenders. And I saw this list because of my mother. But also, I wanted to take a look at this thing and tell you what I felt about it. And let me tell you, I think they didn't get completely wrong, but I also have some things to say about it. So, let's just start off by going through it. So, let's start at the bottom, obviously. At number 10, they put Marc-Andre Fleury. When I say last year's, not this last year's, but last year's, he won the Vezina Trophy. Marc-Andre Fleury, through every team he's been on, has been a solid goaltender. And then put onto the Wild, he's been doing great. This guy doesn't fall off a cliff. Fleury has been great ever since well, actually, I don't know if he's been great ever since day one. But for what I've seen for the last few years, Marc-Andre Fleury is doing absolutely amazing. There's nothing he really needs to change about his game. Fleury at number 10, I feel like you could probably bump him up on that list a little bit. I don't think he's top 5, but I feel like if you could put him more at like 7, I would say. He's more of a 7 goaltender for me. At number 9, Jake Oettinger. Now, I think this guy's amazing, but once again, it'd be hypocritical for me to think that he's amazing after one good playoff run. Not just a season, one good playoff run. Now, this is kind of where I wanted to get into the question of how do you tell who the best goaltender is? Because if you take a look at their list, you can obviously tell that they like certain goaltenders because they're on certain lists. So, like, Ilya Sorokin's in the top half of each goals against and save percentage. So is a guy like Anderson. But a guy that's only on one of those lists, and at number 10 is Jake Oettinger, and he's number 11 in one of the categories. I forget which is which. But Ottinger's at the end of those as well. Marc-Andre Fleury barely appears on those or even close. Demko's not on either one. Hellebuck's not on either one. However, they have some goaltenders, such as Tristan Jarry, and then Jeremy Swayman and Ullmark, are on both of those lists in goals against average and save percentage. And both of those lists, they're in the top 10 of each of those. Unlike guys like Demko, who's not even on them. Jake Ottinger's barely on one. On Marc-Andre Fleury's not on either. So and then Juuse Saros is a Vezina candidate, which I do think he's a great goaltender. However, he wasn't on either. He's only on one of those lists, and he wasn't even that high up on it. Now, that's being said, this is where I kind of get into the question of how do you decide who the best goaltender is. Now, for me, I think, well, and for most people, I believe, that we would say the best goaltender is off of their skill, how good they are, what type of saves are they making. But at the same time, I saw one of the best quotes, or I don't even know if quotes is the right word, but something I heard someone say once is for a goalie to make an amazing side-to-side save, they had to be sort of out of position in the first place to make it, right? Which is kind of true, but at the same time kind of not, but whatever. But at the same time, having to go across ice to make a save means that your team failed you, basically, right? Another team should not be able to go cross ice for that one-timer shot, like by the circles, right? You know what I'm trying to say? Is that the thing about being a goaltender and going off of their stats is so hard because they have it's a lot about what they're facing in front of them, right? And it's unfair for goaltenders to judge them by that because players themselves have individually, like, you can see how they do in their points and just how they play in total, while goaltenders have to rely on how everybody else in front of them, including the other team, is playing. So a guy such as let's just go randomly blink here. Okay, Connor Hellebuck. In front of him, he doesn't have a great defense in front of him, right? Connor Hellebuck's only got, like, Morrissey and Pionk. Like, he doesn't have that amazing star-studded defense in front of him. However, you take a look at a guy like Sorokin here, whose team is basically built around playing the best defensively until this year where Totes is going to leave. That's kind of where there's the issue that lies for me, is that a guy like Hellebuck has to face a lot more, especially since I looked this up earlier, is that Connor Hellebuck made the most saves last season out of any goaltender, and he was only like 30 saves ahead of second place, which was UC Saros. Those two are only separated by like 30 shots, and then number 3 is Thatcher Demko, who is behind by like 100 and something shots behind UC Saros, and then the list kind of falls off from there to like Elvis Merzlikins, right, who doesn't make the list either. So that's the kind of the questions that a guy like Hellebuck has to make a lot more saves. UC Saros is making a lot more saves than other guys on this list. For example, so let's just take John Gibson, for example, right? John Gibson, a goaltender who's been highly regarded in the past. Let me just get the number correct here. Gibson is number 7th in saves, right? Number 7 in saves total, right? And behind him are guys like Darcy Kemper, Marc-Andre Fleury, Sorokin, Shesterkin, even guys like Vejmelka from the Coyotes, right? All the way down the list. Then you get to guys like Frederik Andersen and also Ottinger. These guys are all the way down the list in 20th, 19th, and 24th. You see what I'm saying here? Is that a lot of this goes for what type of players are in front of them. So I feel like this list is somewhat more accurate than a lot of people might think, but at the same time not. So I think they try to please some crowds. And now I think I think the NHL's list that they come out with are purposefully made to please certain crowds in one list, right? So, like, I think a lot of people would like to see Sorokin up here, because Sorokin in total is not really, like, stats-wise, he is doing pretty solid, but that's because a lot of those guys in front of him are doing good. However, if you're going to go off the stats on those sheets, then you're not going to put a guy like Vasilevsky at number 1, which I would, but you see where the problem arises, is that you have, this list contradicts itself, but I think a lot of people, including myself, contradict themselves when they start talking about this type of stuff, because if you put Sorokin up here at number 5, but you're going to put Vasilevsky at 1, then you're probably not going off of stats. But at the same time, if you're going to put a guy like Sorokin on the board, then why would you put Freddie Andersen at number 8? Because number 8, Andersen was in the top 3 of each stat category, and Sorokin was below him. So why is he not up here? But then at the same time, if you listen to those stats, why don't you put guys like Swayman and Ullmark on this list? So then you start questioning, like, okay, well, it's because Sorokin's a better goalie. Well, then if he is a better goalie on paper, then why do guys like Kemper not make it on this list at all? Because a guy like Kemper is obviously more proven than a guy like, I would say, Andersen. I'd say Kemper in the past has shown that he's a better goaltender than Andersen. And I think, for me personally, where I judge goaltenders the most is in the playoffs, because it's a lot more, you can see each goaltender way more underneath the microscope and go out to the challenge, which I think is how much we need to judge goalies by, is by the challenge in the type of shot, the lethality of the shots that they face is probably greater in the playoffs when things are more on the line and things are tougher and guys are playing stronger, right? Then I would say guys like Vasilevsky, like Darcy Kemper, guys like Fleury, guys like, I guess Shesterkin a little bit, but guys like Jack Campbell would shine, because during this last playoffs, Jack Campbell was playing amazing. Shesterkin wasn't doing it as amazing as his stats would say, but he's still doing pretty good. And guys like, do you see what I'm saying here? Is that, and guys like Andersen wouldn't even be on the board. So I feel like this list is kind of inaccurate, kind of accurate in the same way. I think a lot of these guys obviously are top 10 goaltenders. I would say probably all of them are, with, like, I would say maybe John Gibson should make this list instead of, like, a guy like Ottinger. But at the same time, I would pick Ottinger over Gibson if you were like, you're building a team, which one do you choose? So it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard because there's such a goaltending ranking is so hard, when I've wanted to do one for the longest time, but I just don't know how I would do it, because it's so hard to go off of certain things, because sometimes they say wins is the most important thing. Well, that could be true, but then if you're going off of that, then you're saying a guy like Bobrovsky is the best goaltender in the league, and most people would probably disagree with that, especially since a guy like Vasilevsky or Shesterkin's right there, and you would pick them over Bobrovsky right now. So you'd go over for something like save percentage, but save percentage-wise, right, then you would have to go, Shesterkin and Sorokin are your top leaders in those categories. However, guys like Ville Husso and Jari are up there, and they're above guys like Andrei Vasilevsky and stuff. So you can't really go off of one stat like that. If you go off of the stat of, if you go for, like, goals against average, then you got to pick guys like Shesterkin and Freddie Andersen at number 1 and 2. Then below him is Markstrom and then Sorokin, and then go Swayman. And these guys like Swayman, Jari, Olmark, Ranta are above a guy like Andrei Vasilevsky and Jake Ottinger. So it's so hard to really judge goaltenders off of their stats. You have to really go for... I think the best spot to look is playoffs. I think playoffs is where goaltenders are shown where they really got to stick up for their team, because if their team made the playoffs, then they're good enough to contend, and the teams against them are also good enough to contend, and that's where you really get to see who is willing to fight the battle and go to war and stay strong for their team. And a lot of these guys I think are great, but I think some of them don't shine as well during the playoffs, because the playoffs is where their teams are really needed the tasks and really play against harder teams. And then so like a guy like Ottinger, just going off of last year, would be way up here. So it's so hard for me to tell, and I just have to disagree with this list as a concept. Usually I would go look at these lists and go like up or down. I think this guy should be up or down, and I did do that. I would say Saros shouldn't be at number 3, but at the same, that's because he has a lot of hardships playing on the Predators, and I don't see how a guy like him could possibly be higher ranked at number 3 than a guy like Jake Ottinger, who has a lot less good talent in front of him and did quite well. So usually I would go up or down. Where would I rather put them? But I just fundamentally disagree with the concept of this list, because if you go off of stats, then you got to include people like Jari, Swayman, and Olmark. But obviously they are not a top 10 goaltender. And I don't think many people would disagree with you, but if you go off of stats, then that would say them. But at the same time, they go off of them like Sorokin. So, or if you're going off of pure talent, going off of last season, Vasilevsky is probably the best goaltender in the league overall, and I think he should be number 1. But that's not what the stats last year would tell you. But the stats last year would tell you that a guy like Sturkin should be number 2. But that's where it all gets confusing and convoluted, and you can't really come to a consensus. This is like really the most political list that you could probably make, because there's really technically no right answer. That you can completely go off of however you feel. And for me, I just feel you can't make this a list. This is not a list that you could really make. Especially, I feel like if you go off of like regular season goaltending and playoff goaltending, maybe you can make that list, because that's a completely different atmosphere. Because through the normal season, this list would definitely be wrong. But I don't even know. I don't know. I'm just telling you that I think this list is wrong, mainly just as a concept. But how could you possibly rank certain guys? Especially, how could you put a guy like Anderson, who was amazing all year and even led with the most shutouts? I'm pretty sure. I literally did this yesterday. No, Markstrom was the most shutouts. Anderson had 4. But how could you put a guy like Markstrom at number 4? And I don't know. It makes absolutely no sense. Shesterkin wins the Vezina, but they did put him at number 2, which makes no sense because their own people awarded him the best goaltender, even though that's where should number 1 be. So it makes no absolute sense how they rank this list at all. Maybe I'll try to make my own list and then try to discuss it. Maybe I'll do that. But I just fundamentally can't think of a good way, because I feel like for players, you could shift them around the league and then still say how good this certain guy is. But for goaltending, it's so hard to go off of who and what type of players they're going to have to play with and against and who's playing in front of them. So it's so hard to fundamentally, just to conceptually make this list, because it's so hard to tell, especially if they're going to put Fleury at number 10 and put a guy like Sorokin at number 5, but I don't even know. It's so hard for me to tell, because I wanted to go into this and go up or down. I think Fleury should go up. Ottinger's kind of a question. Anderson, I would say, is about an 8, but Connor Hellebuck, I would say, is somewhat overrated, but at the same time, the Jets kind of are not good, and he holds them up and has the most saves in the whole league, so it's kind of hard to tell. Thatcher Demko is a really, really, really skilled goaltender on a bad team, so it's really, really hard to tell where you should put Thatcher Demko, but I think that's the thing, though, is that a guy like Demko suffers a lot from being on a really, really bad team in the Vancouver Canucks, especially defensively wise, but that really gets to show off how he's a really, really just talented goaltender at making a lot of really, really good saves. So it's so hard to tell what to do with this list that I just cannot tell you how I feel about it, other than I just think it's wrong in every single way. So that's what I'm just going to leave you with, is I'm not sure. So tell me down below, who do you think is the best goaltender in the league? Do you think it's Vasilevsky? Do you think it's the Vezina winning Sorokin? Do you think it's, for some reason, Sorokin? Tell me all about it down below. And if you agree with me that this is a dumb list, tell me if you think this is a wrong list, and tell me if you think it's wrong conceptually, or is it not? And if you were to make a list of goaltenders, what would you go off of? Because that's the big question, is how would you actually rank goalies? Because for players, it's like, okay, you can obviously list by points to go off of, and then after points, you could go off of, like, just how their skill and overall play is. Easy. But for goaltenders, it's so hard because it depends on everybody else around them and in front of them. So that's just all I have to say about the goaltenders. I think Darcy Kuemper should be somewhere on this list. I'm surprised he's not. But anyways, thank you for watching this. Please pick up your free subscription down below by hitting that red subscribe button. Leave a like, not a dislike, but go down below and tell me all that stuff in the comment section. And until next time, I have been your dapperly dressed host, Owen. Until next time, I hope you have an amazing day. Too sweet, and ta-ta for now.